Okay, so today I want to share with you my take on whether to go for the Apple iPad Air 4 or to go for the more powerful M1 iPad Pro. Well, so the 2021 iPad Pro that was just released this year. Let's go ahead and jump in. Alright, now these two tablets differ in a number of ways, but they also do share some similarities. So I want to go ahead and start off with design, and let's talk iPad Air 4 first. And the current generation of that iPad Air has been updated to look awfully similar to the iPad Pro. It has that same squarish with a uniform bezel on the face there, flat size around the tablet with a quad speaker look, but it's just a look. You don't actually get 4 speakers. You only get 2 speakers with the iPad Air, and they do sound pretty decent. You'll find the usual suspect in the volume rocker, the power button. You have Touch ID, and by the way, Touch ID is actually embedded in the power button. We also have a USB Type-C port along with some pins for the Magic Keyboard. It is indeed compatible with the same one as the iPad Pro. You then have the selfie camera on the front and a single main camera on the back of the tablet. Now let's talk about the iPad Pro. It has that same popular design from which the iPad Air gets its looks. Uniform bezel around the face also, but definitely thinner than that of the iPad Air. You have flat size around the tablet also with quad speaker setup, and this time around you do indeed get 4 speakers, and they sound much better than those on the iPad Air 4. They sound fuller, they're crispier, and they're definitely louder than the 2 speakers found on the iPad Air 4. You also get the usual suspect with the power button. No Touch ID on the power button here though. We have a volume rocker, Apple Pencil pad, the pins also for the keyboard. This time around we have a Thunderbolt port as opposed to that regular USB Type-C found on the iPad Air, meaning on the iPad Pro you have a much faster data transfer. You got Face ID at the top of the tablet to unlock as opposed to Touch ID. We also have the selfie camera and the main camera module on the back, and just from the looks it is more sophisticated than that of the iPad Air 4. Overall, the M1 iPad Pro looks and feels slightly premium when compared to the iPad Air. Now, when talking specs and performance, this is kind of where, the iPad Air actually just goes south, because the iPad Pro generally is just overkill, at least in terms of specs and performance, especially the M1 powered one. This iPad Pro is boasting an 11 inches liquid retina display with ProMotion technology, meaning it supports a high refresh rate along with a resolution of 2388 by 1668, and it also does support HDR10, and it also pushes up to 600 nits, so it's a very, very bright tablet. Now the iPad Air 4 on the other hand is boasting a 10.9 inches liquid retina display, and the refresh rate is locked at 60 Hz. The resolution here is 2360 by 1640, and it can push up to 500 nits of brightness. Now the few things that I just mentioned there just means that user experience when it comes to that display is definitely going to be much better on the iPad Pro, especially with that ProMotion technology, right? So everything is going to be super smooth, navigating the internet, watching movies, or playing games, all that good stuff. It's going to be super smooth, and scrolling up and down is just so silky smooth on the iPad Pro. And again, it is definitely brighter than the iPad Air 4. And let me go ahead and squeeze this in before I forget. If this is your first time visiting, well, welcome to the channel, of course. I'm really hoping that you enjoy the content so far, and if you are, I truly appreciate that. Please do me a huge favor, hit both the like and the subscribe button there. It's a tremendous boost to this channel here. Again, I very, very much appreciate this. All right, so let's go ahead and get back into this comparison. The M1 iPad Pro comes with 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of internal storage for the base model. On the other hand, the iPad Air pushes 4 gigs of RAM with 64 gigs of internal storage for the base model. The M1 iPad Pro is boasting the insanely powerful Apple M1 chip, which is pretty much the fastest chip on the market right now. It has that next generation neural engine, and it's the same chip found on the Apple computer side. The iPad Air boasts a very fast also and powerful A14 Bionic chip, and this actually makes the iPad Air 4 a tablet for productivity as well. Now obviously you will have zero issues for your everyday tasks, right? So whether it's light, medium, heavy, on either one of those tablets, you'll be fine. When it comes to editing, you'll be able to edit with either one of these two tablets, except the iPad Pro is going to knock out, those heavy edits even way faster than the iPad Air 4. So in the end, the M1 is way ahead of the iPad Air in terms of performance. One of the main difference being the processing power, the speed, and just how the iPad Pro chews through all of these graphic intensive tasks with that multi-thread level of work. Because again, overkill, especially for the vast majority of the population. Now, the next category here, which is camera, is also going to be another one where the iPad Air suffers in the hands of the iPad Pro. The iPad Air 4 has a single 12 megapixel wide camera on the back, as I mentioned earlier. It can do 4K at 24, 30, and 60 frames per second, and can also do 1080 at 30, 60, 120, and also 240 frames per second. The front camera is a 7 megapixel camera. So the selfie camera on the iPad Air is a 7 megapixel camera, whereas on the front of the iPad Pro, you will find Face ID sensors, and the newest upgrade to the camera system on the iPad Pro is going to be that 12 megapixel true depth camera system with ultra wide, which allows for some level of automatic camera movement during video calls in order to keep you within the frame shot. It's pretty cool. And as I mentioned earlier, on the back of that iPad Pro, you actually have a whole camera system that contains a 12 megapixel wide and a 10 megapixel ultra wide sensor, along with Apple LiDAR scanner, and you also get a flash, which definitely comes in handy. Now, overall, it has nice picture quality, nice video quality. As you can see, the iPad Pro also wins that category in terms of cameras when compared to the iPad Air 4. They each have support for the Apple Pencil 2nd generation, but that ProMotion technology on the iPad Pro actually makes for a better experience by cutting that latency down to 9 milliseconds on the iPad Pro, whereas on the iPad Air, you can actually notice a little bit of a lag when compared to the iPad Pro, meaning as you write or as you draw, you will notice a little bit more of that latency on the iPad Air, whereas on the iPad Pro, you barely see anything. Now, there are many other ways in which they differ, but I just kind of want to stop here and give you my take, my overall take on this. If you are in the market for a high-level iPad for productivity purposes, and you are currently looking at these two tablets, go for the iPad Pro if you are some type of art professional, like I've said in the past, or some type of content creator who will be doing some serious level of editing, because the iPad Pro is really spec'd out, at least in terms of horsepower, in terms of just power. So if you're buying it because you're a professional and you really want to make full use of those 8 cores, yeah, you definitely want to go iPad Pro. On the other hand, if you don't find yourself, or if you're not going to be using anything that will take full advantage of those 8 core level of performance offered by the iPad Pro, things like super heavy video editing, then maybe you should go for the iPad Air, because the iPad Air is also a pretty powerful machine, as I mentioned earlier. Now, assuming you end up deciding that you want to go for the iPad Air, it is worth mentioning that if you feel like you're going to need a little bit more storage than that 64 gigs that is offered on the base iPad Air 4, you should consider upgrading to the iPad Pro base, because that will come with 128 gigs of base internal storage. Or you can even do something better, something that I always advise, I always recommend people do. Go for last year's iPad Pro, unless of course you absolutely want the M1, but last year's iPad Pro, you can find it at a discounted price, and it would offer you great power, and you can also take advantage of the fact that you have a lot more internal storage. So just a thought there. Anyway, I hope this was informative. Of course, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Make sure to comment. I'm going to catch you in the comment section like I always do. I'm also going to catch you in the next video, and up until that next video, of course, as always, stay safe out there.